Spinoza's God. Early life and works. Baruch Spinoza was a 17th century philosopher best known for his revolutionary views on God and his mathematical approach to logic and philosophy. His doctrines have maintained relevance through the influence of well-known philosophers and intellectuals, and some of his ideas remain just as important today as they were centuries ago. Spinoza was born in 1632 in the Netherlands to a Jewish Portuguese family. At a young age, Spinoza was made to answer for his philosophical views on God, which would one day make him famous. He was excommunicated from the Jewish community he grew up as a part of and put out by his family because of his denial of certain fundamental concepts of Judaism. Thus, Spinoza was left alone to find his way in the world. He thereafter made a modest living as a lens grinder while living in an upstairs apartment in The Hague of the Dutch Republic. Spinoza wrote 4 books in his life, only 2 of which were published during his lifetime, and only 1 of which was published under his real name. His theological political treatise was released anonymously. His most important and famous work, The Ethics, was published after his death. The last of Spinoza's books, a work of political philosophy, was unfortunately left unfinished before his untimely death at the age of 44. The Ethics and Spinoza's Ideas. Spinoza was a rationalist. This means that he conceived of knowledge as being innate and possible to arrive upon without outside experience or empirical evidence. His method of uncovering knowledge was a logical method akin to mathematical calculation. His religious views were also highly unique for his time. Despite being raised Jewish, he was a strong critic of scripture and secular religious practices. This does not, however, mean he was an atheist. An inseparable part of his philosophy was his unique conception of God. Finally, all of these prior pieces of his philosophical system came together to supply a foundation upon which he could develop his ethics, which was his ultimate goal and thus the name of his masterwork. From his very first published work, the only one published under his name during his lifetime, his treatise on Cartesian philosophy, Spinoza's brand of mathematical logic was clear. His method of philosophizing was geometric in the same sense as his rationalist predecessor Descartes, as well as some of the scholastic philosophers of the Middle Ages. Spinoza presented his logical arguments by first presenting definitions of the terms used in his propositions, then the propositions themselves, and finally providing proofs of his propositions in true mathematical spirit. Spinoza's epistemological views were a far cry from empiricists like Locke and Hume. Spinoza sees empirical knowledge, or knowledge that can be gained purely through experience, as faulty. Any true knowledge requires reason. Additionally, for Spinoza, nothing lies outside nature. This includes the human mind. This statement underlines another way in which Spinoza differed from Hume, namely, his belief that everything is causally determined. Hume perceived causality as being a preconceived notion stemming from our assumptions about how we believe future events may happen, which was in turn based on how events occurred in the past. All of this was ultimately unprovable and could never be known for certain. Spinoza saw it as the complete opposite. Everything in the universe began from a first initial cause, God. Stemming from this point, all things in nature can be traced back to some cause which brought them about. This is not restrained to the natural sciences and physics, but also to human thoughts, emotions, and actions. Perhaps the part of Spinoza's philosophy that made him most famous, and most scorned during his lifetime, was his conception of God. For Spinoza, God is the ultimate cause of all things. God is in all things, and all things are in God. Simply put, all of nature is God. This definition of nature is not the same as the simple world of plants and animals most materialists ordinarily view it to be. Nature in this sense includes human beings, their thoughts, feelings, events, and the underlying causes and substance. All things in this concept of nature are of the same substance, God. God then does not work toward purpose in the human sense and is not set to any end but is infinitely creating and recreating itself. This God does not care about human matters and moral judgments. Spinoza recognizes prior concepts of God as suggested by most religions of his time as imaginative creations of the human mind as a means to, first, explain how the world may be set up in their favor, and second, to be able to direct their superstitions toward that God with hopes that he may choose them above all others and satisfy their worldly desires and greed. After these conceptions of God were created, the following religious traditions continued to create various means of satisfying this man-made version of God in order that they may receive the benefits of his favor. Spinoza concludes that the only way to truly know God's nature is through reason and scientifically acquired knowledge. Spinoza lays out three characteristics of God which appear different in nature but are all part of the whole: substance, attribute, and mode. These are all ways we as humans perceive God, but in reality God is all there is underlying all appearances. Spinoza sees the knowledge of God, and thus nature, as the greatest good and virtue. Thus the ultimate good is to live a life in line with reason that one may arrive at true knowledge. However, Spinoza recognizes that human beings are also natural creatures with instinctual urges. Being that nature is God, he does not shun these passions as lesser than reason, because to suppress them will also lead to folly. Reason cannot be separated from the passions, and vice versa. A moral philosophy which chooses reason over passion is, according to Spinoza, incomplete. Similarly, one which subscribes passion as taking precedence over reason is bound to failure. Only the unification of these two parts of the psychological experience can allow for true morality. A just political system, then, is one that provides freedom for people to seek knowledge while also protecting them from harm. Spinoza has a partially democratic attitude toward politics, though he perceives that any political system will suffice as long as the ultimate end of that government is the freedom, growth, and safety of its people. Influences and legacy. Hegel once said, "To be a philosopher, one must first be a Spinozist." This reverence for Spinoza is not uncommon amongst philosophers. However, even scholars in other fields hold his name in high regard. Perhaps the most famous intellectual figure that was influenced by Spinoza was none other than Albert Einstein. Einstein went so far as to write a poem dedicated to Spinoza in order to express his infatuation with the philosopher's groundbreaking ideas and courageousness to present them no matter how divergent they were from status quo. This divergence from what is considered the norm is observable in Einstein's own scientific work and can thus at least partially explain his feeling of kinship with the 17th century philosopher. Though Spinoza's connection with pantheism is sometimes rejected as a trivialization, it has remained nonetheless influential on subsequent schools of thought in this area. Indeed, pantheism, or the belief that all things in reality are identical with God, is certainly reflective of at least a general idea of what Spinoza was referring to in his conception of God and nature as one. Though Spinoza's pantheism suggested determinism as a necessity some 300 years ago, this tradition has continued in the work of contemporary philosophers such as Sam Harris. Though Spinoza attributes this determinism to God, of which Harris is a strong denier, nonetheless both arrive at the conclusion that there is no free will. This does not mean for Spinoza that we should not be held accountable for our actions, but rather that we shouldn't feel anger at others who do wrong, for they know not what they do. Conclusion. Spinoza died in 1677 while still in the middle of writing his book on politics. Despite being somewhat recluse throughout his life and shunned by his family and the religiously pious, Spinoza was nonetheless respected by some very important people. His funeral was attended by his many friends and both fellow intellectuals and common people who admired his manner equally. This respect and reverence for Spinoza continues to an even greater scale today, as he is often seen as one of the greatest philosophers that ever lived, and his works are still studied and appreciated around the world. Friedrich Nietzsche once proclaimed that God is dead. However, it appears that Spinoza's God is alive and well.